Shalom Aleichem, welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the Yiddish Book Center's virtual theater for tonight's program, Recording Broadway, A Life Cast in Albums, with Thomas Z. Shepard. Before we get started, I'd like to thank all of you in our audience who are members. Your membership makes all of our ongoing work possible. To learn how you can become a member, give a gift membership, or provide monthly sustaining gifts, visit yiddishbookcenter.org, where you'll find information on the benefits of membership and you'll learn how to sign up. Please note that your audio will be off and your video as well throughout the program. You may send us your questions via the question panel located at the lower right of your screen. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from comments so we can try to get to everyone's question this evening. I'm delighted to introduce Thomas Shepard. Tom is a Grammy Award-winning record producer and composer, best known for his wide range of imaginative albums of Broadway musicals, including landmark original cast recordings of work by Stephen Sondheim, Jerry Herman, Jerry Bach, and Sheldon Harnick, and Richard Rodgers. Welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you very much.
Welcome. I'm very excited to have you here this evening. I loved the book, Recording Broadway, A Life in Cast Albums. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, which is a familiar thing for you, and on with the show, as they say.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I will enjoy talking about the book because it took me a long time to put my thoughts together in order to get this book. When I think back on my life, it's almost like it was preordained that I would go into the record business. When I was 3 years old, I wanted a phonograph. The only phonograph that I ever knew about was one that was very, very large, and I don't even remember whose home it was, but the point was, although I could turn the handle, I couldn't open the top and use it. I wanted a phonograph of my own. So my Grandpa Lou, somewhere around my 3rd birthday, took me to a store that had all kinds of phonographs, some which sounded really pretty good, but the one I finally wanted, which didn't sound nearly as good, I wanted because it was small and I could carry it around, and it was like I was like Linus with a blanket. I took this little phonograph everywhere. It only played 10-inch records, so it played things like Roll Out the Barrel, Three Little Fishies, In an 18th Century Drawing Room, Yes, My Darling Daughter. Those are the titles I remember. Oh, I did say Roll Out the Barrel, yeah. And what's most memorable to me is that when we got to the phonograph in the store that I thought I wanted, my grandpa opened the lid, and I was too young to read, but he said, "Tommy, it says in the inside of this phonograph, it says pal, and you're my pal, so we're going to buy this one." He died a few months later at the age of 50, and my parents took an apartment in East Orange. I was born in Orange, and life went on. My mother was a school teacher. As a matter of fact, while I was still in nursery school, she was one of the teachers. She had made a deal with the woman who ran the school, Mrs. Tisdale, that my mother would teach for no fee if I could go to the nursery school for no cost. So I went there for 2 years. I am told, this is not quite a memory, I'm told that at the graduation ceremonies, which means this is a little bit before this, I was still 4 years old, I was the master of ceremonies, and they put out some sawhorses and planks, and they gave me a fake microphone, which microphones have been part of my life. And apparently while I was up there as the master of ceremony of my nursery school graduation, one of my classmates decided to come on the ramp as well, and there was only going to be one master of ceremonies that day. Apparently, I just pushed him right off the ramp. As I say, this is not a clear memory, but my parents enjoyed telling the story. When I was 6, I got a bunch of record albums for Hanukkah, and they have everything to do with the course of my life. One was the Chopin Nocturnes, played by Arthur Rubinstein, Eine kleine Nachtmusik of Mozart, Gems from Gilbert and Sullivan. There were others, but these are the 3 that I think are most significant because I've always loved Mozart, I've always loved Chopin, and I've made practically a career of being involved with Gilbert and Sullivan. So they had a very, very strong influence on me. I even had a fantasy a few years after that Mozart came to visit me in the apartment house, and I showed him the plumbing, and the kitchen and the appliances, and he was relatively impressed. But what really got to him was the collection of records, because he said that I had more symphonies and concertos on the wall on the shelves where the records were than the Archbishop of Salzburg. What else can I tell you? I started studying piano when I was 6 years old. I had a natural gift for music that was evident very, very early. And I had, and I still have, virtually an automatic ear. I can play almost whatever I hear instantly. So that, and I had wonderful teachers. And when I was in junior high, Mr. Morse, an English teacher, decided that he would have an after-school course, and it was called radio plays. And half a dozen of us kids, we were 13, 14 years old, would sit around a table, and he would give us each a script. The one I remember the most was The Odyssey of Runyon Jones by Norman Corwin. And we would sit around the table while Mr. Morse would be off to one side with his phonograph and with a recording of the Shostakovich Fifth, The Pines of Rome. Those are the ones I remember. And we would read our parts. I recall it, I was Runyon Jones, and he would signal us when to stop, and then he would play a music cue, and then he'd signal us to start reading again. And it was just, half a dozen kids sitting around a table. But what was fascinating for me is that when we finished, then we listened to the playback on his Revere or Wallensack tape recorder. And that's, for me, when the magic began, because that's when, even though you couldn't see us, that's when I could imagine what it must have been like for Runyon Jones to learn that his dog had gone to heaven and that he was going to heaven to be with his dog again. It was the juxtaposition of an audio experience with my imagination as to what things look like, which influenced me tremendously. And when I got to be a teenager and I was collecting as many albums as I could from the East Orange Public Library, there was this magnificent recording of the complete Porgy and Bess. It was on 3 LPs, 3 long-playing vinyl discs. And it was phenomenal because what the producer of the recording, a man who had great influence in my life later on, named Goddard Lieberson, he injected the recording with various sound effects of the crap game that's played in the first scene, of the hurricane that almost destroys Catfish Row in the second act, of what it sounded like when the police came to arrest Porgy, and these sound effects were so beautifully handled that I could imagine what this must have looked like, even though I had never seen it. And I stress this right now because so much of my life had to do with my trying to turn recordings into a complete experience unto themselves, so that when I started recording Broadway shows, or even recordings that I made, which I called studio cast recordings, where I cast them myself, and they weren't based on a Broadway production. The whole point of it was that, how can I say this? I wanted a more immersive experience. I wanted the recordings to be able to stand on their own. I wanted, without sets, lights, and costumes, to the best of my ability, to create recordings which were not souvenirs of the show, but rather experiences. And sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I went overboard, but it meant a lot to me. And of course, the older I got, the more daring I got, in a way. Well, let me just back up for a little bit. After high school, by the way, when I was in high school, I was also studying piano and theory at Juilliard in New York. So I was getting a good classical music background. And then after high school, I went to Oberlin College. And Oberlin College was the perfect place for me because they were very active in Gilbert and Sullivan. I had wonderful piano teachers, and it helped to focus me even more on, I suppose, Broadway. Now, I think I should tell you at this point, even though I'm rambling all over the place, that although my book is called Recording Broadway, the actual truth of the matter is that 90% of my recordings through the years were classical. Only about 10% were Broadway. But the publisher of the book was not interested, or if he was interested, he said he couldn't sell a book about somebody writing about producing classical music. So that if you read the book, you will get a picture of me as a Broadway recording producer, but it's a lot of recordings, but it's a small percentage, actually. After Oberlin, and I went to Yale Graduate School for a year, I started looking for a job. And here's what I mean when I say it almost seemed preordained, because the second place I went to look for a job was Columbia Records. And Columbia Records president was Goddard Lieberson, the man who produced the Porgy and Bess recording in 1952. We're now talking about 1959 when I started looking for work. And I was hired as a trainee, and I was very, very fortunate because I was put in the classical department, but the classical department was, for whatever reason, approached by the Columbia Record Club because they wanted a series of recordings made, studio cast recordings of Broadway shows, because the record club sold many different labels. They sold Capitol, for example, and Decca, which had a lot of Broadway shows on it, but there weren't that many on Columbia at that time. So what the club wanted was studio cast recordings of Lady in the Dark, Oklahoma, The King and I, Showboat, Student Prince, Merry Widow. And I was able, by just practically begging to be able to assist the man who was chosen to produce these recordings, a wonderful man named James Fogelsong. And I learned what it was to really sort of get inside a show and to learn and how to cast it and how to try to cast it with some sense of originality, and yet sometimes using people who you knew would be wonderful in the part. For example, I did A King and I with Barbara Cook and Theodore Bickel. You might not instantly think of Bickel to play the King of Siam, but he did a wonderful job. And the more I worked in the studio and I did these recordings, the more I tried to bring visual elements to sort of sneak them into the recording. And that became really in fruition for me when I did a recording of Lady in the Dark with Risa Stevens and Adolph Green. And the thing about it is that Lady in the Dark, all the dialogue, which I didn't use in this case, is in the real world, but all the music and songs are part of a dream sequences. So I was able, by what I hope was the judicious use of reverberation and presence, to create each of these 4 dream sequences as though they were coming to you as if you were dreaming them, and they were leaving you as if you were waking up. That, I think it worked. And I became more and more interested in putting together the mood and the situation. The one thing, as I told you, the one thing I didn't want to make ever was souvenirs. I wanted to make products that stood on their own. And I kept on doing this, on these recreations for the studio, until I began actually recording those Broadway original cast recordings that Goddard Lieberson chose not to produce himself. Now, he was a brilliant producer, and I used to go down to the sessions and watch him work, and I would watch. What I learned from Goddard was how you do the best you can to take that after you've taken away the sets, lights, and costumes. How do you do the best you can to see to it that that the mood is preserved, that the sense of theater, that when somebody sings "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning," which happens to be Curly in Oklahoma, even though you can't see him sitting on a horse, I'll tell you what I can do. I can bring him in from what sounds like off stage so that it sounds he's just entering the scene, and I can bring him front and center, and I can walk him off at the end. And the magic really happened for all of us because in 1960, the stereo disc was invented. I mean, there had been stereo tapes up to then, but the stereo disc, and by the way, 1960 is the year that I began in the recording business. Almost all classical repertoire was being re-recorded, and some of it I was doing myself because I was producing recordings with Leonard Bernstein, and actually I was doing a lot of classical recording. But the point is, it was an opportunity to use stereo in many, many different ways. To use it to have people enter from one side, to have them perhaps cross the stage, to have them recede. And all of this stood me in very good stead. I think those of you who have associated me with Stephen Sondheim probably know that I began producing recordings with him in 1970, and we worked together for 15 years. But from the very beginning, the first one we did was a show called Company, and there is a documentary made of it, which I happen not to like because I was really rather mean to Elaine Stritch. But the recording session took 19 hours, and it was preserved in video. Many of you have probably seen it. It was made by D.A. Pennebaker. But this was my first go-around with Steve. It took a long time to make, but here's where, despite the fact that I've already told you that Goddard Lieberson produced the world's most brilliant Porgy and Bess with all kinds of sound effects and dialogues and an atmosphere and everything, the fact is he rarely did that. When he did it fantastically well. But Goddard believed that what people really wanted, and practically the only thing they wanted, was the songs. He didn't like the idea of using dialogue. He didn't mind abbreviating the songs because everybody wanted them short enough to be able to play an ordinary disc on an ordinary recording. So his recordings really, although they were brilliantly produced and brilliantly performed, nevertheless, they were essentially there to convey the songs, and incidentally were there to convey the characters who performed the songs. And that's, I think, where my identity as a Broadway cast album producer came, is that it wasn't enough for me to have you hear a beautiful song. I wanted you to know or feel the character who sang it. I don't know that that was always attainable, but I know that that was always my goal. Look, except for what we call jukebox musicals, the fact of the matter is, whether a show succeeds or fails has little or nothing to do, believe it or not, with the songs. It has everything to do with whether the book works. You can see a beautiful score that Jerry Herman wrote for Dear World, beautiful score. The show failed. He wrote Hello, Dolly, another beautiful show, but the book worked, the story worked, people got involved with the characters, and the show was a runaway smash hit, as years later was La Cage aux Folles. So it was everything to me to make recordings that gave you a sense of theater, that gave you a sense of direction and motion. And one of the great things about working with Steve is that he bought into this. He liked the idea that he could make certain adjustments that would make these recordings stand on their own. And we worked that way together for, as I said, for 15 years. But I think the pinnacle of our working together, indeed, was Sweeney Todd, which was in 1979, because we pulled out all the stops. We had sirens and whistles and people crossing the stage, and a woman who was in Bedlam, the insane asylum, and an old woman who was traveling around the streets of London, and a barber chair which deposited its victims into the cellar below. Now that's, by the way, I called it, there were many, many special effects in Sweeney Todd, but perhaps the one that was most fun was the one that was when Sweeney killed a victim. He did it by first slashing their throat, then pulling a lever, and then in the show, there was the floor opened up, the trapdoor, and the body went into the cellar, where Mrs. Lovett could then begin chopping it up for future meat pies. Now, there is no up and down on a recording, at least that wasn't possible then. So the only way that I could get the effect that Sweeney was killing people and sending them down to Bedlam, sending them down to be ground into meat pies, was having them travel horizontally and then fall down. Now, I had this wonderful assistant. He was a great producer named J. David Sachs. And Jay created all those wonderful things for me. He fell himself, he slid himself across the room, he dumped himself to the ground, and that's what we used over and over as Sweeney killed people. I used to refer to it as the horizontal laundry chute, the horizontal laundry chute. So that's what we did. I don't know when I should stop talking. I think I've gone on for quite a while, but if this is a good time for questions, Lisa, please let me know. If not, I can extemporize for as long as you would like.
You never speak too long. Don't worry about that, Tom. What I think would be great, and questions are beginning to roll in, is maybe if you could share one or two anecdotes, some favorite sort of stories about working with some of these actors or some of the situations. That would be great. And then, give a couple more minutes and then let's open it up to questions.
Let me think of, remember when I was working with Anthony Quinn, we were doing a recording of Zorba, and he was a very imposing guy. He was kind of enormous and a little bit scary. But somehow when I'm doing a recording session, I feel like I'm in charge. I don't know what the reality is, but I feel very much that it's my baby. And he was doing a duet, in the duet with the woman whose name at the moment, I'm sorry, escapes me, it was a duet in which, as it went along, he was getting more and more pissed off. Except when he made the first take, he got so angry so quickly that he had nowhere to go emotionally. Now, maybe in the theater that didn't matter because you might have seen him get visibly more angry, or perhaps not. But the point is that there would have been some kind of progression, because by the end of it he was absolutely furious. But when he recorded it, and by the way, I never look at my performers on a recording session. That's the kiss of death. I don't want to see what they're doing. I want to hear what they're doing, and that's all I want. And so what I noticed was that he registered so angry at the beginning of the song. By the way, the woman's name was Lila Kadrova. I couldn't think of it a moment ago. He got so angry at the beginning of the song that he had nowhere to go. It was like 5 minutes of high energy anger. So I said to him, I said, "You're getting too angry too soon." So he looked at me, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. He said, "Let me hear the playback." So I played it back for him. He said, "You're right, we'll do it again." That was a nice moment. Not all moments are quite that nice. I was recording 2 by 2 with Danny Kaye, and he changed a little bit of the text in one of the scenes. And I called him on it. I said, "Would you please go back to the way you did it in the show?" And he gave me a stare, and he looked at me. He said, "Yeah, okay." And then he whispered under his breath so that the people around him could hear it, "But you can kiss my ass." Okay, 2 stories. The third one, the one that really hurt, was I was doing 42nd Street, David Merrick's show. I had never worked with Merrick before. He was not a likable man. And we were recording the song in which there's a rehearsal of a tap number. In other words, it was a staged rehearsal, as it were. And he didn't like the way it was coming through because it didn't sound enough to him like a rehearsal. It sounded too much like the performance. This I all learned in due time, but the way it happened at the recording session was he said, turn off the orchestra mics. Well, I don't like people talking to me like that. So I said, no. He said, no. I said, no, I won't do that. So he went out into the studio and he said to the entire cast, you're finished, you're going home, there is no recording today. So I got on the talkback in the control room and I said, I'm sorry, but Mr. Merrick is not paying for what you're doing today. You're being paid by RCA Records and you are not excused. So I had to give everybody a half a minute to call their equity deputies and whatever, and the session did proceed. And by the way, we reached a very nice compromise. Merrick said, well, if we can't remove the orchestra for it, supposing we did it with just a rehearsal piano. I said, that's a great idea. And we did, and that's what we did for that number, and it worked. But it was a most unpleasant experience. My experiences with Sondheim were generally very positive. I mean, we didn't always agree on things, but we somehow or other came together on how to realize his recordings. It's hard to record a Sondheim show because there's almost always a subtext to the songs. People don't always say what's honest. They make it up. They lie. They exaggerate. They explode. And you can't tell. You can't take a Sondheim lyric at face value because Steve was always like looking underneath to see what was really bubbling. I mean, an example in Follies, there's a song, In Buddy's Eyes, which is a beautiful song. In Buddy's eyes, I'm young, I'm beautiful. So she says, but she knows while she's singing it that he's already played around with God knows how many other women, and her name is Sally, by the way, the character, and that she has really no place in his life anymore. Now, you can get that with the right kind of performance, but this was Steve. I mean, Steve, and what I noticed more and more, and I must admit I didn't always like it so much, is Steve got more and more preachy. Children must listen. I mean, the songs like that, he lectured more and more about the way people ought to behave. I didn't always agree. But oh no, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I thought you were at the end there, and I'm gonna.
It's a good place to end.
Okay. So first question to you from our audience is, why do you think Merrily We Roll Along got so panned by critics originally, but is now seeing, I think it means some revisionist understanding of its quality?
Almost nobody who was in Merrily We Roll Along had any prior Broadway experience. They were kids. It looked like a show that could have been put on by the Dalton School. They were very good kids, and one or two of them were adults, but they were completely unknown. It was costumed. It's a whole bunch of things. I mean, everybody was there, just wearing like a sweatshirt that gave the name of their character on it. It was very hard to get people into a show that ran backwards, which started right, which started with the present and wended its way into the past. Um, the and of course, what always comes to my mind is I never knew if it was a dig or a compliment. They named the leading character Shepard, which was not the name he had in the original Moss Hart play. So I never knew if that was a compliment or a dig, because the leading character sort of sells his soul. But I was, of course, I followed the show very closely during rehearsal periods. I saw it actually get worse as it went along. That some of the things they did to try and fix it did not fix it at all. But how could I not go forward with it? It was a beautiful score. I had an artistic commitment, as it were. I mean, Steve is a genius, and I couldn't not record it. I mean, I just had to do it. So.
It's fascinating to hear about this process, and it makes me go back to my father's study and listening to all those 33 LPs with a new appreciation of what I was listening to. And I wonder if you could speak, somebody is asking a little bit about, was the idea of these cast albums something new, and did you fall into it? Because it seemed like this was a natural, they're asking, sort of fit for you to tell this story via the record.
Well, I was always, as I say, I was very involved with Gilbert and Sullivan. I was always, as a teenager, interested in Broadway. I collected Broadway show recordings, not zealously, but nevertheless a fair number of them. I was very fortunate when I started in the record business to be at the company where the greatest producer of Broadway show recordings was also the president of the company. That was Goddard Lieberson. And the sessions were usually on all day Sundays. And I would go to them and I would be a fly on the wall. I'd just stand in the back and I'd watch him work, and I'd see when he would alter things, when he would try and reshape a performance, when he'd say, why don't we try this dance music a little faster? It just lays there when you can't see anybody dancing. And I got into the thinking of, what do you do when you can't see it? You know, what do you do when you can only hear it? And so then, as I said before, when the Columbia Record Club wanted a series of recordings, and I was able to be part of those reissues, it was a way of sliding into, because Goddard couldn't produce every show that came along. At the same time, he was in a difficult spot, because if he did one for Jerry Herman, but he didn't do one for Richard Rodgers, or vice versa, it could cause bad feeling. How come you're doing it for him and not for me? So gradually, what he did was he pulled back entirely, almost entirely. And so that the more he pulled back, the more work I got in that regard. He never ever told me if he liked any of my stuff, but he always, not always, but whenever he needed something done, like, Tom, I want us to do an album of Harold Arlen songs, he'd throw the project to me. And that turned out to be one wonderful album, because we got Barbra Streisand to do two numbers in it. So Goddard really encouraged me along, even though officially it never happened. He never put his arm around my shoulder and said, you're the guy for me. He just said, you do that. And so I did it. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I'm going to try to whip our way through these. Quickly, how many times did you sit through performances before you were ready to record them?
A lot. A minimum of 4. Mm-hmm. But in the days when shows went out of town, Boston or New Haven, I'd also go out of town to see them. And I'd see them as they evolved, because work was being done on them as it went along. and I would get to know the cast to some degree. So that by the time the recording session came along, which might be 6 weeks later, not only did I know the show pretty well, but I also had some kind of comfort zone with the people I was working with, because they had seen me hanging around for a while. So which made it better than if they walk into a studio and there's somebody they've never seen before trying to tell them what they could do better. You know, you can see how that might not go over too well. So yeah, but yeah, I knew the shows pretty well. And also, as I got more and more into the way I wanted to do things, I would also have copies of the script as well as copies of the music. So by the time, in advance of the sessions, I already had prepared. Sorry, I guess it was mine. I would already prepared which pages of dialogue I might want to use, and what underscoring we might need to change or not change to underscore the dialogue, which may now be only a third as long as when it was in the show, but we have all this underscoring. So there was a lot of, not always, but there was very often a lot of preparation before we went in the studio, because as far as I was concerned, I was making a new product.
Right.
I was making something that you could, of course you had liner notes at one time, but I think by the time CDs came along, liner notes were getting more and more abbreviated. But the point was to try and create something that stood on its own. And of course, as I said, Sweeney Todd was really the ultimate of that. You know, it's.
What were the major differences between recording classical music versus Broadway shows?
Oh, what a great question. Well, it's not up to me to tell a classical composer what to write. And I've dealt with some pretty great artists. I mean, I've worked with Boulez and Bernstein and Horowitz. You don't tell them what to do. There may be, although every once in a while there may be something which they may have overlooked. But basically, the job of a classical producer is creating the appropriate sound. You know, where do you put the microphones? Keeping careful track of whatever goes wrong, so that you know exactly what to say. Gee, maestro, could we please redo measures 43 to 59, you know, before you come in and listen? Okay, and so it's more, the artist is really in control. And if the artist doesn't like the sound you're getting, he or she is going to say, would you make the following adjustment? So it's a much more passive, but and not always easy. Boulez was, I really enjoyed very much working with Boulez. Bernstein usually, but Bernstein was, he always scheduled more than he could handle. So at almost every Bernstein session, it was either a rush to finish, or you wound up with overtime because, but of course the results in the end were generally wonderful, and I liked very much. I did some wonderful with Boulez. We did things like it was Wozzeck. I didn't know anything about contemporary music, really, but it so happened in college I spent one semester on learning Wozzeck. So when I was asked to, by accident, when John McClure, because he was getting a divorce, could not produce Boulez's first recording, they sent me to Paris, and Wozzeck was the only piece I knew. So I told you from the beginning, I almost feel, I'm not particularly mystical, but it's almost preordained that I went into this business. I mean, I used to call it, that's in the book, it's called Sound in a Box. It's a miracle to me that a piece of machinery can reproduce sound. It's a miracle. I've never gotten over it.
I guess this is where I get to insert my own question to you. How do you feel about sound? And now that we've gone into a digital era, in terms of that authenticity or that ability to sort of narrate the sound experience as you did.
The good digital recording is a wonderful thing. When you're dealing with an LP, I know that there are people around who worship vinyl, but let me tell you the sad truth about vinyl. First of all, it wears out. Second of all, think about it, one revolution, okay? One revolution. When it's on the outside of the disc, it takes in a lot of area. When it's near the label, one revolution takes in a much smaller area. Now, what is the consequence of that? That as the area gets smaller and smaller, the sound gradually gets increasingly inferior because it doesn't have the real estate, for want of a better word. It's a subtle thing, and there are compensations that are made in the editing and mixing process to try and make up for it. But the actual hard and fast fact is that the best part of a vinyl record is the first time you play it and when you only play the first third of what's on it. However, there was nothing ever replaces those beautiful album covers and liner notes and all that, and I do miss that. Of course, now I miss CDs as well. I mean, now my life is on Spotify, for God's sakes. But the capabilities of digital, from the softest to the loudest, the complete absence of surface noise, to the fact that it doesn't scratch, to the fact that if you take good care of it, it will last virtually forever, is a wonderful thing. A wonderful thing. And it made such a difference to me in making Broadway recordings, because not only were they longer, I mean, because a CD can run easily 80 minutes, whereas an LP runs about 55 if you're lucky. But I could also, when I chose to, separate the sections of dialogue from the music. So if you wanted to skip over it, at Secret Garden, I think was a case in point, you could go through it, and if you didn't want to hear the dialogue over and over, you didn't have to. But at least it was there, so you knew what character was singing. And you're getting me carried away, Lisa. You know.
No, the questions, and we're not going to have enough time for all of them, echo that being carried away. I mean, this one gentleman writes, I was a lone kid in a poor but poverty-stricken family in post-World War II East End London. As a kid, I loved letting my wind-up mono phonograph run all the way down till the music was a deep, slow rumble. Then the record stopped. Then I'd overwind it up and it became high treble. One of the very few records I had was Bar Carol, which I played over and over again. Do I have that?
Barker Roll, do you think?
Oh, what's that?
Was it Barker Roll?
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah. I mean, these are just wonderful memories. Somebody's asking, did you do My Fair Lady original cast or Mary Poppins movie original song albums? If so, what anecdotes can you tell us about them?
No, the answer is no. However, I produced a concert of My Fair Lady with the New York Philharmonic, and I had Kelly O'Hara as Eliza, and I had the name escapes me. The guy who played Frasier.
Oh, I'm terrible at pop culture.
Oh, okay. And they were wonderful. And I had one of my friends for years was Brian Dennehy, and I cast him in the Stanley Holloway role, you know, the father. So and my other friend Charlie Kimbrough played Pickering. So I do have a recording of Fair Lady that I did, but it never came out because Kelsey Grammer, the name I couldn't think of 10 seconds ago, Kelsey Grammer had some kind of fight with the man who was running CBS at the time. And CBS was virtually the sole investor in the original My Fair Lady. So they had the power to prevent the recording from coming out, which actually hurt me very much. But yes, so I did, and I did work with Julie Andrews. I did a recording of Victor Victoria, and she was absolutely delightful, just delightful.
I'm going to make this our last question. I have to find it. Is there anything about your Jewish background that influenced your love for music? And in general, why do you think Jewish composers have been such a big part of American musical theater?
They are an enormous part. You take away Cole Porter and one or two others. It's Broadway is very much a Jewish business, and most of the composers I've worked with, Bach and Harnick, Kander and Ebb, Harold Rome, Harold Arlen, Richard Rogers, Jerry Herman. They're Jewish. But you know, the record business is also very Jewish. I didn't know that when I went into it. And the only Yiddish I knew was when my parents didn't want me to understand what they were saying. So there was just a couple of phrases. And when I became a producer and started working in New York, I learned more Yiddish from the musicians that I was working with. Somehow New York musicians had a lot of street Yiddish. I spent a lot of years working with Richard Tucker. You know, he was quite fluent in Yiddish. So being Jewish in a very Jewish field with very Jewish producers and very Jewish artists. Even Leonard Bernstein, you know, Eugene Ormandy, Horowitz, Rubinstein. I mean, I was in a world. I was in a world of Jews. Yes, when I was 8 years old and 9, I went to, it was called Felix Fuld camps. I went to Jewish summer camps. So, and this was during the Second World War. I learned a lot of Jewish songs, and I always preferred minor keys to major keys. And no, I didn't have a lot of religion, but I had a strong Jewish heritage.
Well, the stories are wonderful. You would make a great dinner guest. So
well, let's have dinner.
Let's go to dinner, please.
Okay.
And for everybody out there, I'm going to hold this up. Wonderful book. Buy it, read it, enjoy it. And many of your questions for all of you out there will be answered in the reading. You have wonderful anecdotes about your experience. And you lived through such an, I think, golden age of musicals and theater. Just fabulous. So thank you again for joining us.
Well, can I thank you, please, for inviting me and making this possible? I've had a wonderful time, and you're a terrific hostess. Thank you.
Thank you. And we won't name last names, but thank you, Naomi, for making the introduction. It's as delightful and wonderful a guest as you promised. Thanks again. The book for everybody again is Recording Broadway, A Life in Past Albums, and it's available at shop.yiddishbookcenter.org and wherever else you get your books. But we do hope you'll buy your books from shop.yiddishbookcenter.org. Again, thanks, Tom, for joining us tonight. Thanks to this evening's producer, Elizabeth Carteropoli, and to our partner in the tech booth, Oren. Thank you so much. Tonight's program is part of our ongoing series of virtual and live public programs. Check out our online events calendar to view all of our many upcoming public programs, both virtual and live, and also happy to share with you that we are going to be doing a lot out in cities, both in the country and abroad. So we hope to be able to see you in person at many of these events. To learn more, to get tickets for these and other events, visit yiddishbookcenter.org/events. Soon we'll be announcing Yidstock, our annual music festival. And before I let you go, I want to thank all of you in the audience who are members. We can't thank you enough. Your support makes all of our ongoing work possible. Public programs, educational programs, our bibliography, and on from there. Hope you'll drop by the center and visit the museum, say hello, learn more about all of this, and learn how you can join and support our work at yiddishbookcenter.org/donate. Until next time, I look forward to welcoming you back. Stay well, stay healthy, and see you in the virtual theater.